Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Two Trees Podcast. I am your official intro man, Martin Listener. I'm here with some of my greatest friends in the whole wide world, like John Dillon.
Hello.
See, told you he's here. And Rose.
I'm so glad we're good friends, Martin. It makes
Some of
me
the
feel
very best
warm
friends that I
inside.
have
Very best, yeah.
in the whole wide world. Welcome to the Two Trees Podcast. We are elbow deep in the next season. I think season 3, right? Technically,
yeah,
if you're
season
counting
3.
sequentially. But we're in season 3, which is the
As opposed
New
to how?
Testament. You know, when you're introing something, you just say words that come off the top of your head.
And you say them peppy.
And you're supposed to overanalyze every step along the way. That way, when people are listening, they're like, man, that guy really is thinking about what he's saying, not just doing this off the cuff or anything.
Right.
Like,
No
he
one would
definitely
assume
wrote this
that.
down.
Definitely.
He definitely, you know, has been practicing it in the mirror all day, ready to go for
He
this.
did make us tea, though.
I did. And I made it with, like,
Sugar.
extra stuff. And
Yeah.
so,
Extra
yeah.
water.
Sweet.
It was very good. But hey, everybody, if you love what we're doing here on the podcast as much as we do, or perhaps even more if that's possible, make sure that you interact with us. We love it when you interact with us. The easiest way to do it, the Facebook page. Go to facebook.com or on your app, type in Two Trees Podcast. It's the first one that comes up. It's our awesome new design on there that John created or had somebody create, and now we're taking credit for it. So thank you if you created that for us. And like us on there. It doesn't cost a dime, doesn't cost a penny, doesn't cost anything. Like us. Try to be interactive. Send some comments, send some stuff. Claim that you can beat me in a sword drill, and, you know, you'll get my response to that. So thank you for that comment. But you were proven wrong. In my head, obviously, we need to do it in real life. So bring it on. Bring on the comments. But also go to our website. The website name is
The twotreespodcast.org.
See how much we rehearsed this, people. We knew
I
it
blacked
off
out for
the
a second.
tip
I was
of
like,
our
I have no
tongue.
idea
He
what
was
it's called.
genuinely terrified for a second.
The twotreespodcast.org. Go on there, put your information in, because then we'll know who you are and we can respond to you. We have some awesome merch. If you want to buy it, we would greatly appreciate it. If you don't, just want to look at it, put in your cart, do whatever, it's awesome. But there's so much information on there. It's fantastic. Everything we've done in the past, some amazing things that are coming up here in a couple of months. That's going to be
Yeah, the conference is on its
super
way.
awesome.
Well, we are in the New Testament studying through the Gospel of Matthew. And last week we talked about dreams, about how the New Testament kind of begins with a look back at the Old Testament. You have 5 prophecies of ancient prophets from the Old Testament who are quoted. And then there are 5 new revelations from God given to characters in the story in dream form. And this is there, I think, to show that this is the hinge of history. Things have been leading to this. And just like God spoke 10 times in the beginning when he created the earth, if you go back and read Genesis 1, you'll find God speaks 10 times. We get 10 revelations of God referenced in the beginning of Jesus's gospel. And when we think of Christmas, I mean, we just recently did Christmas. If you're following us in real time here, we went through Christmas, and if we had half a brain, we probably should have released these during Christmas, but that makes sense now. And at the time, it didn't.
At
So
the
there we
time
go.
we were celebrating Christmas, we didn't have time to talk about
That's
the 3 wise
true.
men.
I still have my stockings up.
I saw that the other
Yeah.
night. I was like, Aaron's like, wow, my stockings are still up. And I was like, yes, they are. She said, there's probably candy in the bottom of one if we want to go dig around.
I don't think there is, but I think there are some things that just kind of get turned into winter decor. I mean, the tree
You
is down.
just keep telling yourself that.
John
didn't-
declined that so fast. I don't think there is. Write down a note. Check
Yes.
tonight.
Check for
Note to
candy.
self.
Yeah. But when we think about Christmas, at least in our culture, it's really common for people to have small little designed sets called nativity sets, where you have a stylized barn and various sheep and donkeys and that kind of a thing. And the major characters, you've got shepherds, you've got obviously Mary and Joseph and baby Jesus. If you've got a really fancy one, you have an angel of some kind floating around up there. And obviously, because it wouldn't be complete without them, the three wise men appear in the art and are remembered as part of the Christmas story. And if you're reading through the Gospel of Matthew, you're going to find the wise men are not there for Christmas.
So you know what my mom did when I was a kid? She would set her nativity up, and she would put the wise men somewhere else in the house. And then every day,
They were like wandering?
yeah, every day they got to move a little closer. So I don't know when they
The
actually
original
landed.
elf on the shelf.
Yeah.
Your mom created that. Wow.
That's cool.
Yeah, well, she's mom.
Well, one of the reasons that we have the assumptions that we do about the wise men really goes back to Christian art. It has to do with nativity art. And Renaissance artists really couldn't stop themselves from painting the Magi. They were a major topic of artistic design. And usually they were painted to look like famous people that the artist knew. It was a way of...
Like a patron?
Yeah,
or
a
something?
patron. Hey, this guy paid for this painting. Hey, congratulations, you're one of the wise men.
Do you suppose that the Renaissance artists put them in the paintings because they added beauty to the picture?
I think so.
Nothing to do with theology, nothing to do with...
Well, you got to remember, an artist isn't really doing theology necessarily. These aren't, I mean, some of them probably were, but for the most part, the Renaissance artists are telling a story and using colors. And if you have a rich, powerful visitor, it's a great chance to paint some really bougie clothes on somebody. And, you know, why not include a camel and a donkey?
A little gold, a little
lot of
frankincense.
gold. Oh,
yeah.
And so what we see are these visiting kings from who knows where, some random place, who have shown up to provide gifts, right? There's no nationality, no city of origin is given, and they follow a star, signs in the heavens. And what I'd kind of like to do today is to talk about who exactly are the Magi, where did they come from, and why do we call them wise men or Magi? And what exactly is going on with the star? Now, if you're wondering if I'm sick, I am sick. I put a please pray for me post up online the other day. So thank you if you did pray for me. I'm still recovering from being sick, so just forgive me if I sound like I have brain fog, because I do have brain fog.
Do you want to tell them about
Same for me, but I'm not sick. So thank you.
Do you want to tell them about the cough drop that you picked up at a gas station, and we expect great effectiveness out of it?
I am worried that I'm going to cough through this whole thing, so I stopped by the local gas station and I bought the finest they had.
It's
of cough
strawberry
drops.
flavored.
Strawberry flavored Halls, and it's tasting yummy.
And if Halls wants to sponsor us, if you're out there, yeah, we'd love it.
Yeah, if they would agree, I would agree.
fine.
Right? So, signs in the heavens. Believe it or not, this is actually a fairly common literary device, commonly associated with the births of important people. According to a book, it's the history of Alexander the Great. There was supposedly an alignment of stars and planets during the birth of Alexander the Great. People considered the skies to be connected to the events and the powers of the spiritual world. And so when they saw the movement of the stars, they believed that they were looking at fate unfolding, prophecy unfolding. In our world today, we have two different categories. We have astrology and astronomy, not to be confused with each other. But ancient people really viewed the world as almost like a clock, that God had ordained certain things to happen at certain times, and the skies were a way of kind of seeing the hands, the minutes and the hour hands ticking across the
That's
sky.
a really interesting way to put that. I've never thought of it that way before, but that actually helps a lot.
And so, John, coming up rather short amount of time, there is going to be a time when basically all the planets are going to align.
I think it's happening now.
Yeah, and it's going to be perfectly aligned in like a couple weeks or something. So the ancient people would have understood that, or would have known that that was going to happen somehow, be able
Yes.
to predict it the
They
same way
would
we
have
can?
looked at that and thought, wow, the universe is doing some interesting things. Things are coming into alignment. And there were men and women whose sole job was to watch the stars, and they're called Magi. And they were watching these things and then trying to think, what is it talking about? What are the heavens pointing to?
But do you think there was ever celestial events and they understood that it really wasn't something specific going on, like in the spiritual realm or something? Or was any time there was a phenomena in the sky, they were of the assumption that something happened?
It seems to be the latter. Anytime something out of the usual happened, someone declared a prophecy of some kind or
So
other.
would it be a smart idea for us to assume that something is happening because of these planet aligning?
Well, I don't think so. I think that the stars are up there and the earth is spinning, and that's just kind of how it goes. But I do think the Bible does have events that happen at particular times. God had determined the day for the Son of Man to come. We're not looking for anything like that now. We're not given a prophecy that says something is coming. We have the second coming, right? But the Bible tells us that no man knows the hour that this is going to be. And so whereas the ancients were looking for this next event in the story of redemption and given kind of clues to this, he's going to be born in Bethlehem, all those types of things, they were watching. And so when they saw this event in the sky, they began to wonder why. Dr. Heiser has some very interesting theories about this in his book, Reversing Herman. And so I would encourage you to check it out. It says that when the when the Magi show up in Jerusalem, all of Jerusalem is troubled. Herod doesn't hear from and say, the stars do weird things, man. It doesn't matter. This seems to have been something that the entire political structure of Jerusalem took very seriously. And so for us reading it, we have to step into that world. I have to set aside my assumptions about what the skies are and ask myself, what did Herod think they were? What did the pagan priests in other temples think was happening when they saw alignments of the stars in the heavens? So let's look at chapter 2 and verse 3.
When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born.
So this is Herod. He is famously unstable. We've talked quite a bit about Herod. And he's gathering together the Sadducees, the power on the Temple Mount. And he wants to know, where is the Messiah supposed to be born? And they don't care. The Sadducees are not interested in a coming Davidic king. They are not interested in that at all, because it would mean that they would lose power. We talked quite a bit about how the Sadducees rose to power, about how the kings, the Hasmoneans, and all of that kind of a thing. But this is the kind of thing that would make everybody upset and nervous. So our look at the intertestamental period should help you understand why are they nervous. These people, these Magi, these wise men, these three kings of Orient far, bearing gifts, have traveled so far, have shown up, and they said, hey, where is the king? They've gone to Jerusalem. Now, there's a couple questions you have here. If it really is a gigantic supernova star in the sky that they're following, they went to Jerusalem, which is the wrong place, and no one else seems to have noticed this. To me, this tells me that there's an alignment of stars happening. I personally think it's Jupiter. I can be proven wrong. I wasn't there. But the Bible, if it wanted to tell us what the star was, I think it would have. Instead, the assumption is supposed to be there is a sign in the heavens. And not just the normal flow of life, but this is something that God had set in motion from the beginning. And it is recognized by the people who are watching. If you want to know who these wise men are they kings? Are they wise men? What's going on?
So just before we go too far,
go ahead.
do you think that this event was something that was unpredicted by them, and that's why it sparked their interest?
Yeah.
So, because, they can track the stars because they move in at least accordance to what the math says and what they're trying to get along with.
Oh, I see what you mean. No,
But
I
was
don't
this
think
like
one of the stars moved out of its dance.
Yeah, like, hey, it's Tuesday, so the star should be here. Whoa, where is it? It's over here. That's oddly different.
Yeah, I think it has to do with what Magi are. Magi are not just intelligent men who were sitting around and saw something really bright in the sky and thought, like Moses, I must turn aside and see this great sight. These are professional star watchers. And they believe that they have access to unseen knowledge because of the movements of the heavens. And so something occurs in the heavens that the Bible describes as a star. And it is a sign to them because they're watching. And they know the prophecies of what has been promised, that there is something happening in the land of Israel, and they travel there. So in the time of Herod, the kingdom of Israel is the frontier between two immense empires. On the western side, you have Rome. On the eastern side, you have an empire called Parthia. And these two kingdoms battle back and forth over territory all the time. Every once in a while, a Roman gets it into his head to invade Parthia. It never seems to go well when they do that. And so the Romans kind of decide this is the edge of our world and the beginning of the Parthian world. But it hadn't been that long ago that Parthia had ruled Israel. And so to have trouble on the border is something that would have caused a lot of people a lot of grief. Herodotus, who is an ancient Greek historian, talks about the priestly caste in the cities of the East, of Persia, and he calls their priests Magi. So do Plutarch and Strabo. The earliest known use of the word Magi goes all the way back to the beginning of the Persian Empire. And so when the Bible uses the word Magi, it's a word that everyone reading it in that world instantly knew, oh, this is Persian. This is coming out of the Parthian Empire, what we would call today Iraq and Iran. And there would have been men and women whose job was to watch the stars. They are like Daniel. They are trained in the unseen arts and in sacrifices and reading omens and all that kind of a thing.
So, but there surely would have been star watchers in other lands too.
But not to the extent that the Magi are famous for this. Like there were Romans who trained with the Etruscans early on in their culture because they were famous star watchers.
Really?
The Romans are much more practical about things. They want, they'll sacrifice a chicken to make sure the battle's going to go well, but they're not as interested in charting the skies. The East, however, is. Remember, these are those people who have inherited the legacy of Babylon, of the ancient observatories of the ancient East. And they have not forgotten. They still have the charts. They still have the wisdom of the ages. And a group of them sees something in the heavens and leaves their country into the Roman Empire to ask where the new king is. You can understand why that would upset Herod. Where is the new king? Said a bunch of people who work for the enemy empire across the way. They're upset about this. The religious caste of Magi, the word means practitioner. It's the word that we get the word magic from. And so when you think the wise men, I don't want you to think like just really
Super
intelligent
smart
people. Think super sketchy priests is who this is. These are pagan priests of the Far East, and they have come searching for the Messiah. This religious caste was all over the Middle East in the first century. It's in Asia Minor, it's in Egypt, it's in Greece, but its heartland is in Parthia. So these are pagan priests of Zoroastrianism. They're famous for reading the signs in the heavens and also for interpreting dreams. So it's interesting that they show up in a text that is talking about a sign in the heavens and about interpreting dreams. Anybody who was familiar with what a magi was would have thought, oh, okay, magic, dream interpretation, signs in the heavens, these are all typically bad things. All of a sudden, this narrative, which typically is the darkness, has been co-opted by God to launch the kingdom of God. These are things that ordinarily you might feel uncomfortable with, but an ancient person wouldn't have felt nearly as uncomfortable.
So I was going to kind of ask about that because it does seem like these guys aren't really in alignment with
They're not.
The Almighty. But it says that they came. You said they came searching for the Messiah. Was that just to prove that they were correct in their calculations, or were they actually seeking Jesus?
I put these guys in the same category as Balaam. This is somebody who has spent their career meddling with the darkness and has had accidentally or purposefully a encounter with the living God.
See, and that's where I'm kind of curious about it, because it's almost as if they were, trying to figure it out, and they were like, "Oh man, this is a massive event." So, like, if this is true, like if what we're reading in the sky is accurate, and there's somebody that's a new king, like, we better side with him, because this is exactly what they said was going to happen.
Yeah.
So, is it something like that where they're just trying to, figure out if what they think is right, or
Yeah, I
were they
don't think-
convinced it was right?
I think that they were convinced it was right. You don't leave your country and travel across the world bearing gold, frankincense, and myrrh for just a whim. They believe something has happened. There has been some sort of event take place. And we're not sure why they assumed Israel. Personally, I think it's because of the legacy of Daniel. Remember, Daniel is a Magi. He was part of this, and apparently these people were well aware of the stories that there was going to be a king born in this place. They don't know exactly, and so they ask. They go to Jerusalem, where the priests are at. These are priests of another nation and of other gods. They worship a god called Ahura Mazda. This is Zoroastrianism. And Magi, by the way, are still around today. There are Magi in Iran and in India. And so I think there's an obvious connection to the Jewish population, but there's also a real-time connection to the religion of the ancient world. These are not the people who should be showing up to welcome the king. Instead, the Sadducees are. The Sadducees are the priests in the temple, and they have no interest in greeting the Messiah. The people who do greet the Messiah are pagan priests. This is the world upside down.
So this is not helpful, but side note, I learned the most about the Magi and Zoroastrianism from reading Henry Van Dyke's The Story of the Other Wise Man. He wrote it in, I'm going to say late 1800s. It's not it's like a novella type thing, but it was really fascinating. I'm not saying it was basically his fan fiction of the Bible, but I learned quite a bit. I mean, they have conversation and descriptions of their religion and just what the reasons that they were going to go and everything. So if you ever just want something to read, especially around Christmas time, it's kind of an easy and interesting read.
What was it called?
The Story of the Other Wise Man.
Write it down.
It's basically the one missed the boat, missed the camel train, and spends the rest of his life trying to catch up with them. And anyway, it's pretty good. I liked it a lot.
So I guess what you're trying to say with that, what we were just talking about, John, is that it's just another example of how Jesus flips upside down what the status quo is. Is that the reason for them showing
not just
up?
the status quo, but this, remember, if you think of it, is an invasion of the rightful king into enemy-occupied territory. How much effort has gone into corrupting the Sadducees from a demonic point of view? I think a lot. You're dealing with hundreds of years of manipulation and twisting things, and then come to find out none of it mattered at all. Satan did not stop the coming of the Messiah. As a matter of fact, just because none of them were there to greet the king doesn't mean that no one would be there to greet the king. God moved people from across the earth to bring about his will. And this, I think, is a sign of God's providence and his power, his sovereign hand at work.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm going with that, because it's, like you said, the people that should have been the ones that were looking out for this, or even expecting this, or even looking forward to it, perhaps. When Mary gets the stuff we just talked about a couple episodes ago, she's elated. Instantaneously, she's like, oh my gosh, this is perfect, what we've been waiting for. And yet the people that should have been doing that, the religious folks of the day, are doing the opposite.
That's right.
And so it's a great representation of potentially what happens today and what happens throughout most of history,
And
really.
so, in a very real way, the kingdom of God is like a very small seed that comes from unexpected directions and grows into a mighty tree. Satan could not stop the coming of the king. Even by removing the priesthood from his support staff didn't stop him from accomplishing what he wanted to do. As a matter of fact, Satan's efforts to stop him unleashed salvation upon the earth, because if they had known, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory.
But again, you can see that in the Magi, because this is something that is normally meant for like dark arts or evil ways, what we're kind of learning about right now.
Right.
And God utilizes those people to show who is really king. And so it's like, it's not just, hey, I'm going to go against the religious people because they're not really doing what I asked them to do. It's like, hey, Satan, your best move, I'm going to take that piece and make my best
Yeah,
move.
there's a couple times in the Old Testament where this occurs. God wants the temple to be rebuilt. Where does the funds come from to rebuild Jerusalem? It comes from the king of Persia. God moves people where and how he likes. And so the rebellion of man is not capable of stopping the flow of God. And this is unexpected for sure, but it's also a beautiful piece of foreshadowing because the gospel was not just a Jewish gospel. It would sweep up to the uttermost parts of the earth. And so to have the very beginning of the birth of Jesus to be an event which lured the Gentile world into interaction with the Jewish Messiah is beautiful. That all of a sudden we have Herod, this grouchy, evil king, and agents of a foreign nation show up in his kingdom asking where the new king is.
And that's just so cool because it's like, God in his infinite wisdom could have told them exactly where to go. Like
He doesn't.
He's in that barn right there, the one
Right.
with the big X on it.
Yeah.
That's the one. But instead they go to the people that should have been doing it right, and they're like, well, where is he? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah,
That's
and
how
they
it's
not
gonna happen.
only don't know, but they don't care.
Right.
Well, they're
They want
disturbed.
to dismiss it almost, right?
Yeah, they're concerned or disturbed, but they're not looking for him. Is that what you mean?
Well, we'll get into why don't they send anyone with the Magi?
That's a good question.
No spy goes with them. No one goes with them to check. They seem to assume we are untouchable. If a Messiah is born in Bethlehem, so what? So what? What could a commoner accomplish that we cannot accomplish? We have the Temple Mount. We have the swords. We have the gold. We have the power. And it's the fact that Jesus accomplishes changing the world with none of these things. He fights no battles, writes no books, funds no campaigns, and is the most influential human being of all time. This is the gospel that God would bring out of nothing and out of shadows the dawn.
It's so interesting. You say, like, why didn't they send a spy? Why didn't they do that? And I just think of the Proverbs where it says, not rely on your own understanding. Like, they understood that they were untouchable. They understood that they didn't need anything. There's been multiple times, even documented in the Bible, where they would just kill off all baby boys, right? Because they're trying to prevent the coming. And now you have an infant child in a very dirty stable. I mean, how easy would it be to just eradicate this human being?
Super easy.
Not to be dark and,
Herod
twisted.
is going to get to that point. There's this, they don't know where the Messiah is going to be. They go check the scrolls because this has zero impact on how they live their life, on what they're looking for.
And so you can now see that understanding that they have is going to fall hilariously short through the life of Jesus. And it's just another way where I think we find ourselves in even today, where it's like, I don't really need to go look for Jesus in a manger. Like, I have a lot of big ideas I'm trying to do. I got a lot of people that I'm trying to help and influence and really figure this out. So I need to work on funding. I need to work on this, plan of action to go through this. And
I
it's
think
like,
that's good.
I don't need to go look in the stable anymore.
We get so focused on what we think God should be doing that we don't much care about what he is doing.
Yeah.
He needs to check with us to make sure it fits our plan. And I think instead, the lesson that I pull from this instance of the Magi is they were living next door to Bethlehem. Jerusalem's like 10 miles away. These guys traveled the earth to get there. When they had a conversation with their maker upon their death, to have not been able to be bothered to shoot around the corner to greet God as he was born on the earth, what a shame.
It's very interesting because my dad was talking in Sunday school several months ago about when Jesus called the disciples, like what clicked in their mind. What was it that when they were called, they understood and they responded? I forget the word that we called it, but it's like almost like the Magi have that same thought process. Like they saw the sky, to Rose's point, there was other people looking at the sky, I'm sure, and maybe not as well trained or not as whatever, but they understood the signs to show that this was really the king, and they were convicted enough to follow and do that. Now, what they did is an outstanding show of commitment to leave your home and travel across the world, go into enemy territory and everything, and do that. And I understand that, and that shows a discrepancy with what the Sadducees and Herod was unwilling to do, which is
Right.
very small compared to what they did. But for some reason, they understood the assignment. the same way the disciples did when they decided to follow Jesus, the same way that you can today when Jesus calls for you and you can decide to follow him with all your heart. But there was something that clicked in their mind enough that they were convicted enough to follow that.
And I think part of it is uncomfortable for us to think of the wise men in pagan terms, because we have so wrapped them up in the gospel story that we are uncomfortable thinking of them in pagan terms. These are obviously godly men who are, because, they have to be. All of the pictures and all those kinds of things show us this. But instead, remember, they don't know the story. They don't know what's happening. They just know the heavens are preaching. Something has come, and they have gone out of their way to see what it is. It makes me think of the text in Jeremiah and in Deuteronomy. It says, you will seek me and you'll find me when you search for me with your whole heart. There is a very real sense in which the Magi are an unexpected beginning. They are dreamers. They are prophets, but of the wrong team. And you wouldn't expect them to be there joyfully praising the king, but they are, because God has come not to condemn man, but to rescue us. It's not a destruction mission. It's a rescue mission.
So, sorry, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, I don't know if you're going to bring this up or not, but I was going to read the beginning of Psalm 19.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because it feels so much like what we're talking about. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. I love that. And it just, as you were talking about that, of course they're going to come. If God is calling and drawing them there, I mean, they may be pagan, but they might be showing up, like you said, to where God is being born. But this is why, like the heavens, it's just the veil's being pulled apart again, and you get to see the whole thing in play here.
And isn't there a text somewhere that talks about nature will reveal God? Like even if, because I always have that question.
We have what we call general revelation, which is what Rose just described, that we can tell things about God from what he has made. And the book of Genesis talks about the stars being there for times and seasons.
And it says here that night to night pours forth knowledge or something like that. Like it's there for them to see.
When you go back and you dig up like an ancient synagogue and you find the zodiac on the floor, which we found several examples of this, we would look at that and be like, oh, no, that can't be in a house of God. That must be pagan. But they didn't think of it that way. They saw this as the hand of God unfolding time as it unwove throughout reality. And so the Magi are a pagan group who are trying to figure things out about the gods or God by watching the stars. And so are there other wise men in the Bible? Are there other Magi? The answer is yes. There's an interesting one in the book of Acts. Let's go to Acts 13, 6 through 12.
I'd really like to spend some more time on what you said, though, about how we differentiate between the pagans and true religion with God. And I think that really is a major difference between when the Bible was written and today, because we're so focused in on monotheistic, and there is one God and there is one and polytheism. And I know Dr. Heiser's got a lot of slack on this, and it's been a big question, but they were trying to figure out the world.
Right.
And they understood that there were powers outside of themselves, to the point where they didn't know really where everything aligned. And we do this today, and a lot of out there people talk about all of this, and how do you rank the angels, and how do you rank the demons, and all of this. And it's like, that's the same thoughts that they had back in the day. And they had the zodiac, and they had other things, because they're trying to explain how creation worked.
And the Bible talks about stars as though they aren't always stars. It's a way of talking about supernatural powers. There's this really great line in Judges that says the stars fought against Sisera from their courses. That's not just saying, oh, the starlight is in my eyes, now I can't fight. This is saying, no, the heavens, the spiritual world is involved in what's happening.
But it just shows how much deeper the Gospels go when we're talking about the Magi coming from the opposite team to prove who Jesus really
Right.
is.
And so this is what I want to point out here is that when we read and we see, oh, a star, we want to know scientifically which piece of heavenly merchandise is moving.
Right.
What exactly is going on? Is it a comet? Is it a meteor? Is it an angel? What's going on? But an ancient person would have read this and thought supernatural powers at work. This is a clue to the reader of the gospel that this is not a man being born. This is not just someone. This is an earth changer. This is someone greater than Alexander the Great. And it clues in the reader that this story that I'm about to read is not a story about just a guy who did something amazing. This is a supernatural story,
But
a blending of the two worlds.
It's so much of a big deal that people from the opposite side were willing to walk directly to the king and say, "Where's the new guy?"
Yeah.
Like, "Hey, old king, where's the new king?" Directly to his face, right? And they're from the opposite side. I mean, imagine whatever war you want to do, the lowliest peasant walking up to the general of the other team and saying, "So who's in charge here?" Like, that doesn't happen. Right? And this is what these people were willing to do.
Yeah, because of their confidence in their craft. Let's go to Acts.
I have skimmed this, and there are some words in here I do not want to pronounce, but I will give it a try.
Yeah, give it the old college try.
That's why I read the first one.
Yeah, good job, Martin. When they had gone through the whole island as far as Paphos, they came upon a certain magician, a Jewish false prophet named Bar-Jesus. He was with the proconsul Sergius Paulus, a man of intelligence, who summoned Barnabas and Saul and sought to hear the word of God. But Elymas, the magician, for that is the meaning of his name, opposed them, seeking to turn the proconsul away from the faith. But Saul, who was also called Paul, filled with the Holy Spirit, looked intently at him and said, "You son of the devil, you enemy of all righteousness, full of all deceit and villainy, will you not stop making crooked the straight paths of the Lord? And now, behold, the hand of the Lord is upon you, and you will be blind and unable to see the sun for a time." Immediately mist and darkness fell upon him, and he went about seeking people to lead him by the hand. Then the proconsul believed when he saw what had occurred, for he was astonished at the teaching of the Lord.
This is gospel. The kingdom of God is being preached on the island of Cyprus. And they go to the very top. They've been brought before the proconsul. This is the chief Roman power on the whole island. And who does he have as his advisor?
A magician?
A magician. He has a Magi. Jafar, that's him, yeah, with the creepy snake staff. And this person isn't in this office because he can do card tricks. This is a representative of the darkness. He happens to be Jewish in descent, but his loyalty is not to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. As a matter of fact, he stands against the gospel as it's preached.
Reminds you of Moses.
It should remind you of Moses, because who is it that is standing against Moses when he's there with Pharaoh is two magicians. This is a trope. This is a literary motif that weaves through the story. I also think it really happened, that this person is a representative of the darkness. This is like Balaam. This is a human being walking in pagan ways, trying to make sense both of the real physical world and of the unseen supernatural world behind them. And so this is a representative of the court of darkness, guiding the political governor of the Roman Empire. He's a Jewish man who's loyal to the spiritual principalities. And to confront this man, Paul is filled with the Holy Spirit, not just with his typical grouchiness, but this is an act of God. The Spirit, this sounds like a showdown. A representative of the court of heaven and a representative of the court of darkness. And it hints, I think, back, like you said, to Pharaoh should come to mind. Luke calls him a magician, a magus. It's the same word used to describe the wise men. Acts chapter 8 speaks of another guy called Simon the Magi as well. So these guys, later when you meet them in the Bible, this order, they're bad. Why are they there at the birth of Jesus? And I think, Martin, it goes back to what you mentioned before. It's unexpected. It's also beautiful that God would use the very thing that was drawing mankind away, if you want to think of it that way, to preach his own gospel. That this is going, you want our attention, you've got our attention, now here I am. He is speaking in the language they understand.
Here's a completely silly analogy to this, but in in big time wrestling, there is an age-old rule that if you provide the weapon, you take the bump. So whoever gets the chair out is the one that's going to get hit by the chair. Whoever gets the table out is the one that's going through the table. And it's the same. I think it's the same idea here. Satan is, using his best weapon, and then God flips the script and smashes it over his own head.
I think God does this a couple times. For instance, when Jacob is fleeing from Esau, he lays his head on a stone to dream.
Mm-hmm.
That isn't usual. Most people, you don't think he had, I don't know, a cloak, a pillow. Like, this is something that you would do. This is a description of a pagan rite. He dreams on this dream stone, and he doesn't get a vision from the darkness. Instead, God says, "Oh, you're trying to call up the dark. Well, how about me? Here I am. Here's the throne. Here's the stairway, the stairs that lead." And Jacob is blown away by this, and he begins to say, "This is the God." There is no question in his mind after this which God he ought to follow. The Lord is unscrupulous at times. He is very flexible in his reaching out to mankind. I think the entire incarnation is proof of that. He's not always going to do the expected thing.
Are you trying to say the Lord works in mysterious ways?
I am trying to
His
say,
wonders to perform.
yes, that God is more awesome than you might think.
I was actually thinking this scene right here. This is not as cool as Martin's wrestling analogy.
That's pretty high level stuff.
Yeah. Well, this is from Lord of the Rings. Who's that terrible character?
Grimmer.
Yeah, is
Worm
poisoning Theoden. Yeah, the King of Rohan. This reminds me of him. I can just see him like creeping around, like whispering.
Yeah,
in his
I've
ear.
often wondered if Tolkien didn't draw some inspiration from for that scene from this story. But it is that example of there is a king, a physical human in power, and there is also darkness, spiritual beings in the high places who are manipulating mankind from behind the scenes. These magi are wizards. They are false prophets. And here they're co-opted and they bring gifts to the king.
So what do you think happened if these guys are relying on the darkness for their powers or their authority or their ability to do stuff?
Mm-hmm.
When they decide that they're going to go find out this new king, wouldn't they be kind of cut off from
Kind of.
all
Well,
of
there's
that?
also this tradition that we get from the book of Daniel, because Daniel is a magi. He is doing this job. He knows the teachings of Babylon, but at no point do you ever get the idea that he is not also perfectly loyal to the God of heaven. They may ask for a sign and say, "Were there birds?" And he'll count them and he'll tell you, but you can tell this man serves the Lord. And so what you have here are unexpected allies of the kingdom. Now, my problem is that I have lots of assumptions that I want to make and lots of questions that I have about the star, about the Magi. But what I'm trying to do is to point in the book what the text is saying. And what I have is Matthew drawing my attention to God's communication to the priests of a pagan nation and providing salvation for them from the hands of Herod, and also to provide the ability for the family, the Holy Family, to survive in Egypt as they're driven out. God is going to use them to further his own goals.
But I really want to talk about how they lose their powers.
It would be interesting, yeah. And I'm not saying that, Matthew and them, they didn't talk about this, but what I am saying is that you have to stay within the book and ask yourself, and I'm not saying don't ask those questions, ask all of those questions, lots, but you're not going to get me to talk about them on here because I'll never get through the book. I want to point out, why does Matthew make such a big deal about these guys?
Don't you think it was revealed to them that the power from Yahweh is much better than what they had?
I think so. I'll just tell you. Yeah, I think these guys become Christians. I just do. I think that they are there and they are well aware, and I love the idea that they waited to see what God would do.
If these people are really kind of what they say they are, they have basically superpowers. They can do stuff that normal humans can't, and then they're just like, I'm going to go follow this baby instead.
Yeah, so
like something had to have been revealed to them.
There's definitely, they're there. We don't know, by the way, how many magi there are. It's possible that there's 3. Tradition says 3 because they brought 3 gifts. There could have been 4. There could have been 6. We know that's plural. It doesn't say the 2 wise guys. It says, they brought 3 gifts. And the gifts are very pricey. Gold, obviously, is a gift fit for a king. Frankincense is a resin from the Botswalia tree. And it's used in sacred space as part of temple perfume. And it's worth its weight literally in gold. This is spices of the East. Myrrh is a hugely expensive and fairly rare item as well. It is an ingredient in the anointing oil that's used in the temple. Also, it's a key ingredient in the embalming process that, for instance, like if you were Pharaoh and you died, myrrh is one of the chief things that would be used to make sure that the body is ready for burial. And so the gifts are chosen, and they're very meaningful. Gold for a king, frankincense for a priest, and myrrh for one who is anointed, destined to die. You can't help but see the whole story of Jesus just in the gifts that are brought here.
Isn't that crazy? Because I'd be stopping at Walgreens on the way. Like, there's got to be a card.
I got to get a card. Happy birthday, baby.
Stuffed animal.
But again, it's thinking outside of yourself. And how many times is Jesus going to talk about loving other people, putting others ahead of yourself? And it's like these magi are acting as Christians. I mean, they are thinking of the kingdom of God and what is to come. They're thinking about others far before they put themselves ahead of somebody. The humility that they're showing and whatnot. It's just a great, again, foreshadowing for what Jesus is going to teach.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't think it's an accident that he tells us what the gifts were.
So do you think the gifts were inspired? They were inspired to bring those gifts, or is this just standard procedure for visiting at
no,
royalty?
I mean, those would be very expensive and meaningful gifts. But my question would be more, why does Matthew tell me what the gifts were?
Yeah.
I can't help but at least think that Matthew seems to see significance in naming the gifts. It's not just that he says, and they brought wealth from the East. He specifically tells you what it was that they brought. And so that tells me that the words are loaded. Anytime the Bible is giving you specific details, and it doesn't need to, it's not just rambling. It's giving you facts or setting a picture for you to chew on and to think about. Now, in our pictures, the wise men show up in Bethlehem. I don't want to be mean, but the wise men did not show up in Bethlehem. They don't show up for the birth of Jesus, and Matthew doesn't mention Mary's time of purification after the birth. Remember, a Jewish woman would not just immediately have a baby and then be expected to rejoin society. She gets time off, and there's a purification process. And then afterwards, what did Mary and Joseph do? They took the baby to the temple. They weren't just waiting around in Bethlehem. Luke chapter 2, verse 39 tells us that they presented the child at the temple, and afterwards they returned home to Nazareth. So most likely the wise men went to Nazareth and not to Bethlehem. But since that messes up everyone's nativity scenes, we won't look at that too hard. So what is the prophecy that the Sadducees are looking at? They are looking in Micah. So would one of you guys read Micah chapter 5?
Now muster your troops, O daughter of troops. Siege is laid against us. With a rod they strike the judge of Israel on the cheek. But you, O Bethlehem, Ephratah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be the ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is of old, from ancient days. Therefore he shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has given birth. Then the rest of his brothers shall return to the people of Israel. And he shall stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they shall dwell secure. For now he shall be great to the ends of the earth. and he shall be their peace.
So this is Micah 5, 1 through 5. And perhaps you can tell that this would not be a verse that's popular with the Sadducees. It implies that their rulership is not enough, that Israel will not be protected by them, and that more is needed. So here you have a beautiful look at the Messiah. And it's made all the more vivid when one places the court of Herod and the Sadducees into the story. The promised king is not Herod. The promised court is not the Sadducees. Herod is a vicious, self-absorbed, evil guy. The Sadducees are manipulative and unfaithful priests. The contrast is pretty clear. The Messiah would come from Bethlehem, a king from the house of David. Bethlehem Ephratah. This is the place where David is from. The Sadducees, the Maccabees, Herod, everyone has tried to forget about David. Quit talking to us about David. Look at what we have done. Pay attention to us. Let those old stories, let those old myths go away. Ever since Zerubbabel, the house of David had been sidelined. Now, not through the cleverness of men or through the swords of armies, the house of David was rising again. It says that he is born to be the ruler of Israel. You can understand why Herod would hate this. Herod has always been an outsider. He has had trouble ruling Israel because he is not from a long Jewish pedigree. Instead, he is viewed as a Gentile convert. The Sadducees had tried to play kingmaker before, and they were now firm supporters of Rome. So this prophecy has zero welcome in the court of the Sadducees or of Herod. It says his coming forth has been from of old, from ancient days. This is one of those moments when the prophecy connects the past and the future. This has always been the plan. After all that the darkness has tried, the plan was exactly on track. It says, therefore he shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has given birth. Then the rest of his brothers shall return to the people of Israel.
I have a question. Therefore, he shall give them up. Who is he giving up?
He seems to be giving up Israel. This is the Lord saying that I am not finished with Israel, but there's going to become a time when I am waiting. This is the event that will push forward the end of exile. Remember, they didn't view themselves as having ended the exile. They believed they were still in exile, and most of the Jewish people still lived among the Goyim, among the Gentile nations. And so what you see here is that there is a hope of the end of exile, but not through Herod, not through Rome, not through the temple, not through the Sadducees. What will end the exile is the birth of Messiah. The Messiah would be a godly king. Herod wanted to use the temple. Herod's crown was given to him by the Romans, and the deed of his kingdom was put into a Roman pagan temple. Israel's hope is in the house of David, but more than that, it's in the kingdom of God. They shall dwell secure. This is something Israel's never had. Israel's strength was not in its armies or its wealth. You remember David's census. How many fighting men have I got? It doesn't matter how many fighting men you have. Your strength is in the Lord. Israel was brought out of Egypt not because of their great power, but because of the hand of their God. And it says that then there will be peace. This is a phrase that the world of Matthew would have been instinctively aware of because of a man called Caesar Augustus, who had brought about and made part of his platform that he would bring peace to the world, the Pax Romana. And this man, Caesar, is not going to be the Messiah. He's the most powerful politician maybe ever. But Christ is what he never was. It was the power of violent men who had twisted the world into temporary peace. But Caesar would fail. the Messiah, the Christ, was something unlike the world had ever known. In case you're wondering, that's 7 things pointed out in this
7
prophecy.
points in this. Wow.
Yeah, that's not an accident
Good
either.
counting. It's just math.
So, John, Herod
Mhm.
and his buddies would
All
have
of them.
known about this Micah 5, 1 through 5.
Apparently not. They seem to have known that there was an idea that Messiah was coming, but it didn't affect them in any practical way, and so they didn't care. When they ask the scribes, where is he born, they don't read him the prophecy. They just say Bethlehem. And there's a reason for that, because if they had read him the prophecy, there's a chance that Herod would have lost his little brain and started removing heads of these priests. Why haven't I been told about this threat?
So you think that Herod does not know this information?
I think he does not know this information.
His trusted advisors are not to be trusted, basically.
Yes, it turns out that they did not deliver a full message to him.
Because it's just interesting to me, because when you read, you know, back in the garden, when you're talking about what Satan is to be crushed, and yet he's acting today as if he has a fighting chance. It's kind of the same way here. The Sadducees know what's going to happen. I mean, they've read it. They see what's to come, and yet they're acting as if they have a fighting chance in this, or that they could somehow be the Messiah or beat him to the punch or do something that's going to change God's plan.
Yeah, there is a way that seems right to a man, and the end of it is destruction. It isn't that, we just don't know. It seems right to us.
Yeah.
And we pursue it because mankind cannot define good and evil for ourselves. We proved that in the garden. We couldn't tell true good from true evil. And it's not any different for these Sadducees. When Jesus comes, it's the high priest who puts him to death. It's the Sadducees who bring this about.
And it's the Sadducees' information that they give to Herod that brings about the death of all the children.
That's right.
You know, oh, these guys are baddies.
Yeah, they're not very sweet at all.
So who would have been the better group for Herod to have asked if they didn't really know?
I'd have grabbed a Pharisee or two, personally.
I was wondering, but so why wouldn't he have?
Well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, the Pharisees are not fans of the Romans. And they've driven the Pharisees pretty far out of Jerusalem for the most part. They're there on high holy days. And there would have been some, but there's politics involved as to who's closest to the king. And it was the Sadducees.
To me, it's very interesting, because I think it's repetitive today, because when we have a problem, we go and talk to the pastor or the priest or whomever. And we expect you to fix our problems, John. So if you could, do that, that'd be great.
I can't even shake this cough.
If Herod would have read the Word of God himself, if he would have personally had a relationship with the text, perhaps he would have had different thought process. If he's relying on a middleman to tell him what he needs to do in his life to be more godly or to be more powerful or to be more whatever, he's going to fall short eventually, because the telephone game's going to catch up to him.
Yeah, Herod views the hand of God as a threat to his power, which ought to tell you immediately whose side he's on.
But he's also going through somebody else to get that information.
Yep, and even the Sadducees, later on, they do the same thing. We have to put this man to death, or the Romans will come and take our place.
But Jesus, and I think this is another representation of that, Jesus is asking for a personal relationship with you, not with your pastor who's then going to tell you what to do.
Right.
He wants a relationship with you. So if Herod would have not looked for a Sadducee or a Pharisee or a now I see or whatever, then he would have went directly with the text and had a relationship with his maker. He may have had a different thought process.
Yeah,
in a
I
lot
mean,
of his
dreams
actions.
were happening all over the place here, visions of God. What if Herod had said the Messiah and truly longed for the coming of the Messiah?
Right.
Would the Lord have revealed himself to Herod? Possibly. He definitely revealed himself to the Magi. There's a lot of unanswered questions here, and I think we should ask them as we push through the text. What is happening?
But I think Herod is a good person to look at and to see that type of mentality. Like, Herod did this, but he could have very easily been like the Magi, to the point where the Magi were probably doing things that Herod wasn't doing.
Yeah, and
they still were able to
Herod
be
had
turned.
built a temple. Herod was the great donor, the great benefactor of the temple. But even though he looks on the outside like this great champion of the Lord of hosts, he is the enemy. It's not what it appears to be on the outside. That God looks on the heart. And so when the when the Magi, the good ones, they show up with their gold and frankincense and myrrh, it sets up the next step of this story. One of the things that's important if you are linking stories or completing story arcs is to have important events happen in the same places. For instance, we talked earlier about Alexander the Great. When he was born, there was this great sign in the heavens. When Alexander the Great launches his invasion of Persia, one of the first things he does is he goes to the ruins of a city called Troy. He wanted his invasion to be seen as a new Trojan War. He wanted his regime to be linked with the heroes of the ancient past. And so by his first stop going to Troy and making offerings, he was linking his story to the ancients.
Is Troy part of the Persian Empire?
Mm-hmm.
It would have reached way over then, wouldn't it?
Persia?
It seems
Yeah,
like
at the time, it went all the way up to the very edges of Greece.
Is that right? I did not realize that because that's a pretty big wraparound.
Yeah, so God doesn't cause the evil of Herod, but he uses the evil to bring about goodness. Herod is acting like Pharaoh. He's murdering the innocents. And Jesus is going to begin his earthly life as an exile. Even though he's born in the promised land, in the city of David, he's driven out by the evil of men. And so Jesus not only is bringing meaning to the present, but also completing the story arcs of the past. It's a reversal of Exodus. The promised land is not safe for Jesus and his family. The land that should have been longing for his coming and welcoming him back is instead seeking his death. This is a betrayal, and it's a reversal now. Egypt becomes the land of safety. It's a reversal and a criticism of a historic reality. What you're seeing here is more than just a description of historical facts. What you're seeing is God, the Maker, weaving symbolism into reality. And so it's not an accident that Jesus goes to Exodus, to Egypt. This is purposeful. The story has been stood upside down. They fought so hard to leave Egypt to go to the land of promise. How are we going to get the land of promise today? By the Messiah who leads the people out of Egypt. The gospel account is real history. It really happened. But it's also highly symbolic. God made the symbols happen in real life. And so we can look into the historical documents for context. The actions of the people in the gospel show more than just events in the physical world. They show that there is spiritual players as well. So when you read this story, ask yourself, why are you telling me this? Why are you telling me he went to Egypt? Where in Egypt did he go? How long was he there? It doesn't say, did they live in the wilderness or did they live in town? What did Joseph do while he was there? And by the way, what happened to Joseph? Because we don't see him a whole lot anymore. There's a lot of questions here. And so my advice to you, dear reader, would be to ask why.